Welcome, everybody. I'm here again with, you can hear her laughing already, co-host Jen David Lang.
Not quite.
Uh,
Hey there, Mike.
Pretty much. I mean, it's good. So we're back because I would argue by a popular demand or at least necessity these days, with a very cool book, a very popular book called The Distance Learning Playbook, grades K through 12, Teaching for Engagement and Impact in Any Setting, by some pretty big names here: Douglas
Yes, yeah.
Fisher, Nancy Fry, and John Hattie. So, so Jen, how come you picked this book?
Well, if you're anywhere on the planet right now, you've probably noticed that we have a pandemic going on, and we had near universal school closings in the earlier part of 2020, and now schools have had some more time to plan, at least here in the US, for reopening in August, September. And previously, what I would say and what the authors say happened in the spring was more like emergency remote instruction, right? People just sort of cobbling together whatever they could. And so these authors came together and they put together lessons learned from the spring and from other crises that have shut down schools, together with general historical research on what improves student learning, to put this book together so that as we reopen schools and as teachers have time to plan for distance learning, we can all do a better job.
and and so so this book I love how it's broken up. It's broken up into 9 modules,
Hmm.
and we're not going to do all 9 of them in one shot because I think it would be, and I agree with Jen, too much. So we're
Yeah.
going to do the first 4 because they
Hmm.
sort of focus on soft skills, and then we'll do the second 5 of them in a subsequent podcast that get more into pedagogy and assessment and that kind of stuff. Sound like a
Yeah.
plan?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. So why don't we get after it? So why don't we just start? Let's just start with module 1. So module 1 is take care of yourself. So
Yes.
so let's hear about that one, Jen.
Sure. I mean, educators are notoriously terrible at taking care of themselves. And the authors say that most of us did not sign up to teach through a screen. That isn't what pulled us into education. Maybe it's what pulled you in, Mike, didn't pull me in. But so the first thing that we have to make sure our teachers are doing is take care of themselves or they're going to crash. I've already heard, we're recording this in mid September, and I've already heard of principals talking about their teachers cracking. So, yes, as leaders, we need to think about the social emotional needs of our adults in the building, or they will not be able to serve as effective teachers. So, Module 1 gives a few tips, a few things to think about. Um, One key idea is to think about your workspace. Now, I am calling in from New York City. This does not mean you need a whole wing or room for a separate office, but just dedicate some workspace. Take the corner of a kitchen, an unfinished basement, put your items around you, your mugs, your gifts that you've gotten from teachers, and create what will be a workspace. And also create some ground rules, right? Can your teenager use the noisy washing machine while you're home teaching? Can you put a sign up that lets people know when you have your simultaneous class so you're not interrupted? So just set aside a workspace is one small part of taking care of yourself. Another part is creating some routines, right? A lot of us went out and we used to jog before school or, at least get showered and dressed. So it's time to bring those routines back. So, what do you want to do? Do you want to have a break in the middle of the day? Then take a break in the middle of the day. You want to get changed, put on a cardigan like Mr. Rogers, put on your work clothes. But the idea is to have regular routines that you can do your work in using so that you better take care of
So
yourself.
that one is huge, and I
Yeah.
have experienced that. And I was having a conversation with a superintendent in upstate New York, and he said that when he was completely when we were all completely virtual. Now a lot of school administrators are back, at least in
Yeah.
upstate New York. We're back in either full or part time. And we were talking about this, and he said, because he would normally have about a 45-minute drive into work. And, he would stop at the gas station and get his coffee and, listen to a podcast or two. And when the quarantine first started, he didn't do that. And there was something, he felt like there was something weird, like it just didn't feel right. So eventually he started getting up, showering, getting ready, then getting in the car, driving to the same gas station to get his coffee, take the long way home, and then he did his little commute. And then when he was back at home, he was ready to go. And I just thought that was spectacular. And I started doing it to go get my Diet Cokes in the morning.
Yeah. It's a great idea. I mean, those routines don't seem like anything, or maybe they didn't seem that important before the pandemic, but you realize how important those routines are now. As humans, we really rely on routines so that we're not rethinking, like, what do I do now all of the time? And also particularly for breaks and for exercise. Just today, I was running a mastermind, and one principal said, I don't really have time for self-care. And if you don't take the time now, you're literally not going to be able to continue teaching remotely. If you don't exercise, you may be in so much pain you cannot sit through another 8-hour day in front of your computer. So the routines are super important.
Well, and I know it's a little cliche, but it's true, right? When you're on the airplane, what do
Yep.
they tell you about the oxygen mask?
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Put it on yourself first. And it does seem cliche. And I think that combining this idea of taking care of yourself physically and emotionally and the idea of routines, if you put those two together, that will help make sure that you do it. So rather than, can I find time to take care of myself? Well, I take a run every morning at 6 a.m., or I join a buddy for a walk at 4 p.m. every day. So take the self-care and take the routines and put those two together.
And the next one is another one that has been challenging, but is hopefully getting easier for people as things start to loosen up around the country, is socialization. So talk about that one.
Well, especially people who work in the field of education, we're used to having people around us, right? You teach your class, then you have break, you go into the staff room, you have hallways, cafeteria. We don't have that anymore. So it's really important to proactively plan for socialization. So whether that's having an in-person or a virtual coffee with your colleague, or just planning to do regular online professional learning in a regular way, or calls to family members, just to remember that the people piece is usually pretty important to those of us in education.
Yeah, I've even had, have people do virtual happy hours, things like that. But I think in a lot of places, teachers are going back to school physically. So hopefully there's opportunities for that, even in a socially distanced and safe kind of way.
Yeah, but they might feel pressed for time because things are so crazy now, and people may not feel so comfortable gathering around the cooler. So it's just a reminder to make sure to take that time to interact with other people, both in and outside of your school.
So we've had workspace, routines, socialization, and the next one we talked a little bit about, but I think it's worth reinforcing, is physical health.
Yeah, I think we've heard this over and over, whether that's eating well, exercising, or managing your stress. I mean, the number of people who, when you ask, how are you, say, I'm stressed, is astronomical in the field of education. So the authors really emphasize this is key to do before you get into the details of what you need to do for distance learning. You got to take care of yourself.
The last one is compassion fatigue. And I've heard people maybe not use those words, but when they tell you what's going on with them, you can kind of hear it. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I think this isn't something to incorporate, it's something to be aware of, which is that, people, particularly in the helping profession, experience when you're helping other people in distress, you yourself have compassion fatigue from having too much compassion all day long. And the authors just remind us that if you are experiencing anything particularly strong, like, deep suffering or isolation, emotional outbursts, apathy, serious physical ailments, that please do reach out and get some help, some professional help. We have to be models of resilience for our students, and we can't be if we are completely exhausted and spent.
And I also think this is an opportunity to be models of, I don't know how to say it, but paying attention to mental health and trying to help, doing our own little part to reduce the stigma attached to mental health, and use those talking doctors. And there's plenty of apps, and there's plenty of access these days to therapists and counselors in virtual settings, and it's easier than ever, I would argue, to access that kind of support. And I think we ignore it at our peril.
Absolutely. And I think students need to see us taking care of our physical, emotional, and mental health.
So, Module 2, the first days of school, that harkens back to the Harry Wong book.
Hmm.
Remember that one?
Sure.
All
Got a
right.
summary of it, of course.
Of course. Um, so, what did the authors have to say about the first days of school?
Well, this is when, you start to recognize these modules as the authors aren't introducing completely new ideas. They're basically saying teachers know how to teach. We need to remind our teachers that they know how to teach. And this book is just translating those ideas into the virtual space. So, for example, um, in the first days of school, which we know are so important, right, for setting the tone right, you want to have really clear norms and expectations. When we were all automatically moved to remote instruction, a lot of teachers didn't take the time to think, well, now I need to create new norms and expectations. So, for the beginning of this school year, and even if you've already started and haven't done so, what norms do our teachers want to have in place so that students interact respectfully in a virtual space, right? How do you want students to comment on each other's posts in the chat box, right? How do you want students to show you that they're paying attention? So, in the same way you would do it face to face, choose a few norms, maybe co construct them with your students, try to phrase them using positive words, and actively teach them to your students so that they learn what are the norms and expectations for this virtual space. And a big one, Mike, I don't know if you heard, a lot of people, a lot of educators were talking about students who wouldn't turn on their camera. And, what do we do as educators, right? Do you make them turn on their camera? What's the etiquette? I don't know if that came across your desk or your interactions with people. But, the authors say there's really good reasons why students may not choose to turn on their camera, right? They may not feel comfortable sharing what's happening at home. There may be private things at home. So rather than requiring that all students turn on their camera as a norm, you might have a norm that says, please, as a first attempt, try to turn on your video. And if not, project a school picture. And I know a lot of teachers would then have students type in the chat box to show that they were really there and not snoozing. Um, so think carefully about your norms and expectations.
And, and, I,
Um,
and I think one of the points you made is really important, that you have to teach it. I mean, we have to teach it if the kids are there physically. And I don't know about you, Jen, but I've been on a lot of virtual meetings, Zoom, WebEx, Google Meet, you name it. And there's a lot of adults who can't figure out how to do it. So, talking over people, not muting, all those things that annoy the what out of us, that
mhm.
grown adults with master's degrees can't figure out, and we're expecting second graders to be able to do it. So the teach piece, I think, is a big deal.
Yeah, I think in a traditional classroom, sometimes we don't teach, have a norm, treat each other with respect. And then you just expect because you've said it that students know how to do that. But what does that mean? Now you have to do it online. So, doubly, what does it mean to treat each other with respect? Right? Does it mean when someone's speaking that you interact in the chat box? Does it mean you make eye contact with the camera? You absolutely have to teach people. Some of our students might not even know how to mute themselves. They might not know that the expectation is to unmute yourself instead of raising your hand, or that there's, a way to raise your hand in some of these online programs. So you have even more to teach now. You're absolutely right, Mike, than in face-to-face instruction.
So, and I think that kind of folds nicely into module 3, which is teacher student relationships from a distance. And these have been conversations that I've had with managers and school leaders and employees, that I felt like as we transitioned as adults from being completely in person to being completely remote, I feel like part of what worked was that we already had strong relationships with one another built in an in-person way. And then when we switched to being virtual, those were already in existence. But now you might have, a lot of school districts are starting out remote where teachers have never met their students in person. And so what do the authors recommend for building those relationships at a distance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you hit the nail on the head, Mike. That's the problem, right? We don't know our students now in the same way that we did in the spring when we shut down. But I absolutely have seen it, and I absolutely agree with the authors that you can build teacher-student relationships. You must and you can. Um, Having strong teacher-student relationships is huge for learning, right? I can't learn from someone who I don't like. So what the authors did is they broke down the characteristics of effective teacher relationships into 5 areas: empathy, positive regard, genuineness, student-centered, and encouraging of critical thinking. And I really appreciate when authors, particularly those who are using research, take these sort of amorphous ideas like teacher-student relationships and really break it down into what does it mean. So to give a few ideas of examples of what it means, and specifically what it means in a virtual space, we can look at a few of them. So the first one is empathy. So understanding. How do you build empathy and understanding in a virtual space? Well, just positive affirmations. Just, as students are coming online, hey, Mike, how are you? Hey, Jen, how's it going? Sharing jokes, laughing, speaking to them. I know a lot of teachers are holding virtual office hours for support. That's a great way to show your empathy and understanding, provide opportunities when students don't understand. Offer some brief check-in conferences with families rather than waiting for November for the official parent-teacher conferences. Offer it earlier on because students, families, a lot of people are confused. So that would show a great deal of empathy. So those are some examples of what you can do to build empathy.
One of the
Positive
things,
regard.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to
Yeah.
say, and one of the things too that I've noticed and I've tried to do this over the last few weeks, and in my role, if I'm not careful, I end up getting scheduled back to back to back to back over WebEx, where there's no transition time in between. So I've been working really hard to build a little bit of time in, so that if I'm starting this meeting, I try to start it a couple minutes early, so that then if other people get in there early, you can chit chat a little bit like you would in real life when you were having a meeting in a room and people come in at different times, and you can have quick little conversations and catch up with people. And I found in doing that it puts people at ease. Even as people are entering, there's people chatting, so it
Yeah.
just feels a little bit more natural than, okay, it's 1 o'clock, fire up the meeting and do it.
I like that. That's a great idea. And it also, if you have a class of 20 or 30 students, when some of them come on early, you get to give them more one-on-one attention too, that you might not have, during the regular class. So that's a great idea. I do love that as a way of building empathy. And it's also a way of building another one of their attributes, positive regard or warmth, right? You can show more warmth when you don't jump into business as usual. Some other ideas are to make sure to weave students' interests into your teaching. So I know a lot of teachers, they give out surveys at the beginning of the year and find out what students are interested in. Absolutely do that now. You can still give a survey, and it's even easier online, right? You can gather it all in SurveyMonkey or Google Forms. You can provide polls for students, right? Everybody seems to be flagging here. Google, Zoom has a poll function built right in. Everyone seems flagging. How about we just do a quick poll? Who wants to take a 60-second stretch break or something like that? Another idea that I really like and may not seem so connected to warmth or positive regard, but use some of the programs that offer voice feedback on student work so they can hear your voice. So even if they've written an essay or done some math problems, they can push a button and they can hear their teacher, Mr. Dowdy, say, "Oh, James, you did a great job here, there, and there. You might want to tighten this up." That just makes them feel more connected and comfortable with you. So those are just a few brief ideas of how you can translate strategies to deepen teacher-student relationships to the virtual world that the authors offer in this module.
And I would make, and I don't know if it fits here or somewhere else, but as the parent of two deaf daughters, I would also make a plea here that if you have students with special needs, like a student who is deaf, taking a little bit of extra time, even extra time at the beginning to figure out what kind of modifications and accommodations not only are required but are helpful. Really talking to the student and saying, because they had experience with it over the springtime. What worked? What didn't? Is it how do you access the interpreter? Or, whatever it is. Because I watched my older daughter struggle with that a little bit and really have to advocate for herself in terms of communicating what her needs were to her teachers and her interpreters and things like that. So not sure if it fits here, but definitely worth
Yeah.
remembering.
I love that idea. I absolutely love that idea. You can add it to a survey if you're doing some type of survey, right? Where you're not just asking, what do you do in your free time or your hobbies or your favorite sports teams, but you're also asking, what would help you learn better in a remote learning situation? And that might be for students who do have special needs, but also students for whom remote learning was quite difficult in the spring. They might really appreciate you asking them how you could make it easier for them to learn this school year. So great idea, Mike.
Well, and I definitely wouldn't discount the asking about favorite sports teams because how else would I know to give special and favorable treatment to the Buffalo Bills fans?
Right. Or how would I know to be angry about all the Yankees fans as a Mets fan in my household?
Oh, wow. There still are Mets fans. That's great, Jen. Good to
uh,
hear. Oh,
all right. We shouldn't go there.
okay. So moving on. We're both New Yorkers-ish, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and just to be clear, the Buffalo Bills are the only NFL team that actually plays their games in New York State. But whatever, we won't go there. So far then we've had module 1. We talked about teacher student relation. No, that was 3. I'm trying to recap here to make sure we're doing
one
good
was
teaching.
take care of yourself.
Yep. 2, first days of school.
Yep.
3, we had teacher student relationships, and 4, the last one we're going to talk about today, is teacher credibility at a distance. So this one really fascinated me, and I'm very curious to hear your take on it.
Well, first of all, to introduce the research, I'm a research geek. I think you are a bit too. The effect size for teacher credibility, that means the impact teacher credibility has on student learning, is incredibly high. Any effect size over 0.40 means that it's an added bonus to your instruction. And this has 1.09, an effect size of 1.09, which is very high in John Hattie's research.
That's wild.
So it's basically what teacher credibility means is, do your students believe they can learn from you? Seems so small, but if a student believes that she can't learn from you, chances are she won't. So again, it's a broad amorphous term. Teacher credibility, what the heck is that? So the authors have broken it down into 4 areas: trust, competence, dynamism, and immediacy. And probably intuitively, you didn't realize it, Mike, but when you were a teacher, you probably had a great deal of teacher credibility. So now looking at these 4 areas, you can sort of self-assess and see where you were with them. So the first is trust, right? You absolutely need your students' trust for them to be vulnerable and to struggle and to try to learn from you. Even trust is a large term. So, what does that mean? That means if you promise your students something, keep it. If you ask your students to bring, you know, paper clips to the next virtual session, make sure you use the paper clips. If you ask follow through. If you ask students to write a paragraph, then make sure you use the paragraph for something. So building trust is incredibly important. Tell the truth to them about their performance. They know if you give everyone a 10 on their online discussion board comments, then it doesn't mean anything if you give it to everyone. So if you write good work and you don't really mean it, students can sniff that out from a mile away. So be honest, be transparent, and follow through, and that helps to build trust. The next area is competence. They have to believe that you are competent enough to teach them. So listen to great podcasts like this and keep up your knowledge of pedagogy and content. Make sure your lessons are organized and clear. Don't worry if you don't know a million tech tools. Just learn a few tech tools and focus on the few that you know really well. It actually signals a lack of competence when teachers, go all over the place and they use Nearpod today and Flipgrid tomorrow and all that. No, no, no. Just give them some predictable learning routines. In the book, it has one teacher who he uses similar learning structures every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, meaning not every day, but so Mondays always start out with students watching him on videos. He records these short videos with information in them and quick quizzes for practice. That's always what happens on Mondays. On Tuesdays, he models his thinking in several live readings, so students can choose which time during the day, and he has questions in the chat. So he's very predictable. He does the same thing on Mondays, the same thing on Tuesdays, and that signals competence much more than trying a million different tech tools and approaches.
Well, and it goes back to what we talked about before with routine. Human beings like routine. It settles us down. It keeps us calm, and it frees up the mental and intellectual bandwidth to learn versus trying to guess what's going to come next.
Yes. Yeah. I think it helps for both, right? Both for the students and also for us as the instructors. If you have some type of framework, it helps because everyone's so overwhelmed right now. The two other areas that build teacher credibility, don't want to take too long here, but dynamism is the third area. And that's really just a fancy way of saying your passion for your content, for your students. It's very hard. We're all really tired right now. So if you could find some way to rekindle your passion for why you wanted to teach in the first place, it really reminds you, oh, we're not here for the pandemic. We're here for the long run. Try to bring relevance to what you're doing. Can you make connections to the real world so that we're not just doing this in 7th grade math so that you can succeed in 8th grade math? You can get connections, bring in the community. It's easier now than ever to bring in people to speak to your class, experts, community members. And get feedback. Sometimes you don't know how you look on Zoom or in your online class. Maybe ask a colleague to come observe a class and ask them, do I seem like I'm dynamic and alive and really excited about the content and the students? I know that's a vulnerable thing to do, but you might want to try that.
It's not a terrible idea. And that really is one of the best ways to get feedback, or record yourself doing it. And then that's really painful, but you'll figure it out quickly. Yeah. One of the things, too, around that with dynamism is probably one of the most common comments I would make to either, when I was a principal, to either student teachers or new teachers in their first couple years was, if you are not excited about this content, there's absolutely no way the students are going to be. So, you can take that right off the table. So unless you're able to get excited about it and truly enjoy it, you have no hope that students will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can hear, right, us, when we're excited about topics, it comes across on the podcast. I think it's the same thing with teachers. It kills instruction to say, okay, what we're going to do next, we have to do because blah, 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 blah.
Or this is really dry. We have a lot to get through. It's kind of boring. From what we know about psychology and priming, okay, you've just set the expectation that it's going to be unpleasant, and chances are you will meet it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the last one,
Hmm.
immediacy. Talk about that.
This has to do with like how accessible and relatable you are. And I don't know, we used to call it like with itness. Do you have with itness in the classroom? And that's really hard to do in a virtual space because, kind of like what you were saying about starting a meeting early, you can't really hang out outside of your classroom, right? And chat with students individually as they walk in as easily. You can't just maybe walk through the cafeteria at lunch and chat with a few people. So, how do you make yourself more immediately available to students? So, a few couple of ideas. Certainly use student names a lot, right? Even though it's virtual, you can still be saying, hey, Jerome, I see you've got that poster in the background of this or that, or hey, Mary. So you use names. Um, Pop into breakout rooms. When you send your students off into these small breakout rooms with 2 or 3 or 4 students, you'll be able to be a lot more present with a group of 3 or 4 students rather than in a whole large classroom. So, and certainly ask students to give you some feedback, just like you would ask your colleagues for feedback. Ask for the students for some feedback. What does this classroom feel like? I just saw on Twitter today that a teacher said that a student thought he had his mute button on and he didn't, and it was right before class, like you were saying, Mike. And he said, "Oh, I love this guy. He always makes sure to smile." So the student was trying to be quiet about it, but actually was providing a huge compliment and was aware that the teacher was intentionally, trying to smile and make students feel comfortable and good. So it was a great tweet to see today.
That is super cool, and I that whole idea with immediacy too. I think there's an opportunity to set clear expectations. So not only with students but with families too. So if you send me an email, you can expect that I'll get back to you in 24 hours. If it's something urgent, you do this. If it like just really getting things as clear as possible, I think helps from the beginning.
That is true. And we won't get into that now, but clarity is coming up in the next module, but we don't want to overwhelm people given this overwhelming time.
Look at that. That was a really nice segue. It was like we planned that or something.
It was. We did not. We are being transparent that we did not plan that.
Yes, Jen and I being transparent. All right. Well, this was great. I mean, I think there was a lot in there. Hopefully, people found it helpful. And in the show notes, as always, I'll put your email address so that people can email you if they want a copy of the summary, assuming that's still okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Great book. Got to read it now.
Excited about it. So, Jen, thank you. As always, it's so great to talk to you. So refreshing to talk to somebody smart who knows a ton about education and whose heart is in the right place. So thank you.
Aw, that's very nice. I always love talking to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.